All right, let's talk about free trade agreements, or FTAs. These are those massive deals that promise to totally reshape economies. But when you look at their real impact on manufacturing, which is the engine for so many countries, well, it gets a lot more complicated than the headlines suggest. So today, we're going to peel back the layers and really dig into the fine print.
So let's just get right to the big question, the one at the heart of so many economic debates. Do these agreements actually help a country's manufacturing sector, or do they hurt it? Are they creating jobs and prosperity, or are they just shipping them overseas? Well, you probably guessed it. Like with most huge economic questions, the real answer isn't a simple yes or no. The truth is, it's incredibly complicated. The effects are really uneven, and a lot of the time, the success of any FTA has less to do with the agreement itself and, way more to do with what a country's doing at home.
Okay, so first, let's talk about the promise. What's the textbook theory behind these deals? In short, it's all about this idea of creating bigger markets and hopefully sparking a lot more growth.
I mean, on paper, the logic is really powerful, right? You cut tariffs, and boom, you suddenly have access to millions of new customers in other countries. All this new competition is supposed to make your own industries sharper, more efficient, and lead to higher output. And for us, the consumers, that means lower prices. For the whole economy, it's supposed to mean growth and getting more plugged into the global system. It really does sound like a perfect win-win.
But what happens when the ink is dry, when the theory actually meets the real world? Well, let's take a quick global tour and see how these promises have actually played out. And let me tell you, the results are often surprising and they're far from uniform.
Our first stop is Asia. We're looking at the big trade agreement between India and the ASEAN bloc of nations. This thing was a landmark deal, designed to create a real manufacturing and trade powerhouse.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the massive gap between the goal and the reality. The whole point was to boost manufacturing trade, but instead India saw its trade deficit get even wider. A huge reason for this was something called trade diversion. Think of it this way. Instead of India buying a product from the most efficient, cheapest producer anywhere in the world, the FTA made it cheaper to buy from a less efficient producer, just because they were inside the ASEAN club. So trade was being diverted, not necessarily created.
And this quote from researchers Amin and Gava really hits the nail on the head. They found that just signing the FTA isn't nearly enough. If you want to get the real benefits for your manufacturing sector, you need very specific, targeted policies at home to make your own industries more competitive. The agreement might open the door, but you've got to be ready to actually walk through it.
Okay, let's hop over to another massive Asian trade bloc, the RCEP. This one includes the ASEAN nations plus 5 other major economies. And this case is a great example of how even within a single agreement, the impacts can be incredibly uneven.
So, just take a look at this. The agreement was a clear win for rubber exports. Why? Probably because member countries had a strong demand that just wasn't being met inside the bloc. But for things like palm oil and coconuts, where competition within the bloc was already super fierce, the agreement actually had a negative impact on some exports. It just goes to show you, FTAs create winners and losers, not just between countries, but between different industries in the very same economy.
All right, now let's shift gears and look at a totally different kind of partnership. An FTA between a highly developed manufacturing giant, South Korea, and an emerging African economy, Kenya. This one really highlights how much those developmental differences matter. The results here are pretty wild. The agreement did spur growth in both countries, but in completely different areas. For South Korea, the benefits piled up in its powerful manufacturing sectors. No surprise there. But for Kenya, the growth was mostly in agriculture and services. So this shows how FTAs can sometimes just reinforce a country's existing economic strengths, rather than fundamentally changing them.
So, we've seen that the results are all over the map. Now let's dig into the why. What are the actual economic mechanics that are creating all these winners and losers? So to really get this, we need to know 2 key terms. The first one, trade creation, is the golden goose. That's when the FTA helps you sell something to a brand new market you couldn't get into before. That's a huge win. But then there's trade diversion, which is the hidden downside. That's when the deal causes you to switch from buying from a really efficient, low-cost global supplier to a more expensive one just because that supplier is now tariff-free inside your little trade club. The trade numbers might go up, but overall efficiency actually goes down.
And of course, these big economic shifts have a very real human cost. You can trace the ripple effect pretty clearly. An agreement gets signed and tariffs drop. Then cheaper imports start pouring in, putting a ton of pressure on local businesses. And, inevitably, this can lead to job displacement, people losing their jobs. And that's why this fourth step is so critical. You have to have a safety net, things like retraining and financial aid, to help workers get through these changes.
So this brings us to the solution. If just signing the deal isn't a magic wand, then what is? What does the policy playbook for a successful FTA actually look like?
It turns out the real work actually begins long after the signing ceremony. It's all about what happens at home. The countries that win from these deals are the ones that actively boost their own productivity with new tech, like Indonesia's been focused on. They make it easier to move goods by fixing their supply chains and customs. That's been key to Thailand's strategy. They directly support their workers, like with the adjustment programs in North America. And they create clear, stable rules that protect investment, which builds confidence and attracts more capital.
And you know what? The game is constantly changing. As we look to the future, there's a whole new set of challenges and opportunities that are completely reshaping what these trade agreements need to do.
The next frontier is without a doubt digital. Think about it. Modern manufacturing, from smart factories to global supply chains, it all runs on data. So today's FTAs aren't just about physical goods anymore. More and more, they're about setting the rules for data flows, for intellectual property, and for digital products, all things that are now absolutely essential for a competitive manufacturing sector.
So, when you boil it all down, what's the ultimate takeaway here? Well, the research is crystal clear. The impact of FTAs on manufacturing is complicated. It's messy. It depends on a ton of factors. But the single most important element, the one that pops up again and again in all of these studies, is the critical role of a country's own national policies.
Which leaves us with a final and, I think, pretty provocative question. We spend years, sometimes decades, negotiating the fine print of these massive global trade deals. But what if the policies we create right here at home, to educate our people, to invest in technology, to support our own industries, what if those things are ultimately way more important than any trade policy we sign abroad? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.